Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Shall we go for it?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Jess, Jamie, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Thank you for having us. Doing really well, thank you.
That's the first bit where you go, who wants to answer? Because you just asked us both the question.
I know Jamie's pointing at me just now.
I love that. Did you run the drill first and you were like, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll point at you if he asks a general question and then you point me. Otherwise, we're both going to interrupt each other. No, I love that. As we start, I wanted to sort of jump back into this sort of thing because we haven't done a couples on the Frontline podcast in ages. And what I love most about these is, we talk to so many people about the challenges that they face as an individual. But what we so often forget is that it's part of a big family. And then every now and again, you come across people where they are both trying to lean into some sort of community service, some sort of, taking their skill sets and applying it to something that really adds sort of value to what they do in the community that they live in. So just give us a quick whistle-stop tour, first with yourself, Jess, sort of your background and then leading into what you do today.
Okay, so I've just turned 32 actually. It was my birthday yesterday.
Happy birthday.
And thank you very much. This year's been a bit of a life-changing year for me. So I started with Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in January this year. So I'm a brand new baby firefighter just at the start of my career. Before that, I spent 6 years in the Children's Disability Services, so I managed my own service in the Scottish Borders, and we looked after children with learning disabilities, so that could be children with autism, but we also worked with children with complex physical disabilities as well, so lots of patient sort of care. And I suppose my time there, I just wanted to extend on the skills that I'd learned and put that more into the community and be more useful. So I've been trying for sort of 6 years to get into the fire service. I had a little flutter.
Wow.
I know, I had a little flutter. It was 6 years ago, actually. There was an airport service taken on, and I turned up for the physical test and kind of had my heart broken because I didn't pass the hand grip test. It was on a machine. And from there on, I got the bug, and I was just desperate I saw what the potential for my future had, and it just became a dream. So
I love the aspect that it took 6 years as well, though, because that real shows massive resilience.
I think it does.
Yeah.
It shows the determination to get in.
You can almost tell a lot more about somebody by how they take a failure as well. I often say to people, if I'm mentoring somebody, one of my firefighters or crew managers or whatever it might be, that, pay attention to how you react to the loss. If you don't get it, the people interviewing you or the people on the call giving you the feedback, people notice how you take these things. And if you're already in the service, how you show up the next day or whether or not you show up the next year and the attitude in which you do that, it matters. And whilst people can't specifically mark against that, there's no two ways about it. It does leave a mark and it does show real character. And I find that's something that's harder to develop when you're young. So, I didn't join the services, I joined first when I was 18 and then transferred over to a different one in my late 20s. And it really does have a different element of character to it, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, that's the important thing I wanted to put across as well, that despite failure, to always come back with a positive attitude and just show that the growth, really, over the amount of times that I tried. And that's how I show up at work every day. I always turn up happy. I'm Little Miss Sunshine, despite the sort of battles and struggles that you might have along the way. People will remember your name and you don't want them to remember you in a negative way. So
100%. I always think that people's attitudes as well. We say smiles are contagious and all that sort, but your attitude's contagious. Do you know what I mean? Do you want somebody to catch yours? Even when you're on that bad day, how can you I'm going to ask you something in a bit before I go straight down this rabbit hole, because there's an aspect of children in there, and I want to get back to that because I know you've got children, and I'm really interested in hearing more about the job you used to do. But Jamie, give us a one for yourself, brother. How did you get into what you're doing today?
So I'm now in my 9th year with Police Scotland. However, prior to that, I spent a couple of years with the Civil Nuclear Constabulary.
Jesus, what is that?
So the Civil Nuclear Constabulary is a relatively small and very well unknown police force within the UK, but it just covers all civil nuclear power stations. So, I mean, the major one within the UK is Sellafield, based in Cumbria, but I was based at a site called Dounreay, which is on the furthest reaches of northern Scotland, next stop Iceland, sort of thing. And their remit is basically the protection of civil nuclear power stations, basically anything that's providing the national grid with power in relation to nuclear energy. So that role was actually an authorised firearms officer role. So, I did all the sort of firearms training for that, but very quickly decided it wasn't for me, being that it's just based on a power station and not really out in the public doing what you would maybe call stereotypical policing.
You know what, with the greatest respect, I thought about that when Jess was talking about the airport fire set, and we've had airport firefighters on before, and they do a wonderful job, but you never really see or do anything. It's a real challenge for it.
Like, with all due respect to the service, and to some people, they do very, very well and have very fulfilling careers within it. It just wasn't for me, and I decided that fairly quickly. Not because I felt incapable, but just because it wasn't the policing career I had always envisioned having, if that makes sense. I mean, I applied for it in the sort of late noughties when we were in the midst of a financial crisis and police forces weren't recruiting. So that was what was available to me at the time. I mean, as I say, I left there and joined Police Scotland, where I've now been for sort of 9 years. I've worked the first 3 years in Edinburgh, sort of big city policing, which was great. But we stay out in the countryside, and I've spent the last 6 years now out policing the Scottish borders. My friend down in Manchester likes to think I worked somewhere in Heartbeat in the 1970s.
Today's podcast was in partnership with our good friends Johnny and the team over at William Wood Watches. Now, if you're not familiar by now, William Wood was the name of his grandfather. He was a firefighter in the British Fire Service for over 25 years, stationed in Newcastle on the Blue Watch. Now, his grandson Johnny is a great friend of the podcast and came up with William Wood Watches to honour his grandfather and the legacy of firefighters all around the world. Now, some pretty cool updates from the William Wood Watch team. When it comes to their chivalrous collection, this August they came out with, honestly, one of my favourite looks for it. They came out with the gun metal for the face of the watch. Now, if you go over there and look at their watches, they've of course got the Jubilee, the Triumph, the Valium, the Bronze. But if you look at the chivalrous range, this is effectively the luxury dress range. It's got that sleek case, the luxury finish, and you can wear it on absolutely any occasion. I myself, I've said on the podcast before, I'm a massive fan personally of the Valiant collection. I've got the red watch, always with the red strap. Now, they do come with a selection of straps as well. And honestly, for me, the straps is probably one of the most favourite parts of it. It really is the one that catches everybody's eye. It's what draws you into it. And when you receive your William Wood watch, that whole unboxing experience is actually kind of special. Whether or not you get the fire alarm box or the VIP roll, usually comes, I think, with 3 different straps. However, I think it is if you get the Triumph collection, which is the Swiss precision watch made in Switzerland, you actually get that really unique fire alarm box as well that comes with it. Now, that thing is absolutely stunning. You know the types you see in buildings where it says break glass on the front of it? That, honestly, it's been made into this luxury leather-bound box. You open that bad boy up, you see all the straps, you see the bottom compartment where you get the encasing watch. Pretty sure it comes with the cufflinks as well. And again, if you go over to their website, williamwoodwatches.com, you'll see that this company really does support firefighters all over the world. I think to date they are over £75,000 they have contributed to firefighter charities all over the world. So head on over and check it out. Have a look at the chivalrous first. They've got a chocolate range on there, but for me, the gunmetal one, if you're going to have a look at the gunmetal, that looks absolutely fantastic. The Triumph is probably my favourite, and I'm saving up for that one at the minute, but I have got the Valiant collection myself, and I absolutely love it. Johnny and the team are really making some moves with William Wood Watches, doing some great things for our sector. Now back to the show. Well, logistically in Scotland, I would be right in saying it's quite widespread, because I remember from the fire service perspective, and Jess, you'll know this far better than me, didn't they used to have 5, and then they all collected into 1? Is that what I was saying? That
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
is it similar to the police or?
Yeah. So you've now got Police Scotland, and it now covers, in the same way as the fire service, it's just a nationwide one force. So that happened the year before I actually joined. That was 2012, and I joined in 2013. So yeah. So we're just one big force now, one big happy family.
What's the travel things like over there? Because like, I wanted to explore this because I've been on the phone with a few people from America, and some of them, like, they have a 2 hour commute, and I think they look at travel and commuting a little bit differently than how we do. If we have to do anything more than like 40 minutes, we think it's like a real ball ache of a commute. Whereas over there, I think just because they're used to driving across states, so like a 5 hour drive, they would be happy to do that on the weekend to go and visit people. What's the commute like up in Scotland? Because, like you say, from a sort of population density perspective, it's obviously significantly less. Or am I talking out my arse there?
No, it's not too bad. So my commute into my station is 15 minutes, and Jamie works at the same time, so we are fairly lucky. It's only 15 minutes, but
It's pretty
you
good.
have worked in Edinburgh.
That's what I mean. Isn't the challenge that, like, because one of my friends said, if you then get transferred to, because it's all one service, if you just suddenly get transferred, and it could be the other side of flipping Scotland.
As I say, when I first started, I worked in Edinburgh. That was about an hour and 10 minutes for me. Now, I really liked my job in Edinburgh. I worked at a fantastic station. It was really busy, good team. However, it ultimately comes down to, did I really want to spend over 2 hours a day in a car? And the financial sort of impact of paying for fuel on a public services wage, I suppose, especially a probationer's wage at the time.
What do probationers come in at? Sorry, I know that's a personal question, but...
I think it's more than this now, obviously, but when I was doing it, it was 23,000, just above 23,000.
God, it's offensive, isn't it?
I think it maybe now would be a bit more, maybe 24, 25. I'm not sure about the fire service, though.
I was a stay-at-home mum at the time as well.
Yeah,
so we were managing on that.
That's crazy, isn't it? I mean, I think paramedics start at like... Yeah, I think the paramedics start at like 22 or 23. And you've got to have a degree to go into the police service now. I think you do, don't you?
No, you don't. See, there's a difference between policing in England and Wales and that of sort of Scotland.
Okay.
I'm only going on what I believe is the case here, but that policing in England and Wales is you can join with a degree and you will get paid more than those that join without a degree. Now,
really? That's a bit harsh.
Yeah. So, now, I believe that is then, as you rise up through the pay scale until you hit the top of your pay scale at 10 years, that you would all be on the same. So you would ultimately end on the same wage, but with a degree you come in higher.
Okay.
Now, that isn't the case in Scotland. You don't actually need any qualifications in Scotland to get into the police, not even... they're not called GCSEs in Scotland. They're called standard grades. But you don't even need that. You can just join without a qualification. So, which is really great because from a recruiting perspective, we're really not like holding anybody back from joining based on their maybe school career 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They can join today even if they weren't particularly academic, which I think is good.
Yeah, because I think for a lot of people, like you say, that they weren't particularly academic, but I'd rather have somebody with the right mindset rather than somebody with the right academia or the right skill set. Because if they really want to do it, you can teach a lot. Even if somebody isn't completely literate or something like that, they can do base level English modules and stuff like that, which will only take them a couple of months to complete. And adult education has come a long way, so I imagine they would support. Because I know in the fire service, when people apply and they haven't got the right GCSEs, as long as they're willing to undertake coaching and stuff over, I think it's a 2 or 3 month period, and then ultimately passed. I think they call them functional skills, maths, and some sort of base level literacy tests. Then, like you say, it's much more accepting. Whereas knuckle dragging firefighters, I don't think any of us have to have degrees to come in either. So I think it levels the playing field a lot.
I think ultimately as well, the goal of all public services, I think, is to try and be representative of society, isn't it? And to be representative, you sort of need everybody from every background, and that includes those that maybe didn't have access to the best or highest level of education,
Yeah, I think subconsciously it was probably quite elitist in that respect. Although now we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. That was probably one of those unknowns we didn't really consider at the time. So talking about the fact that you guys have been together, so you'd have joined the police service, as you were just saying, before Jess, you were in. When you said about the job you did before Jess, because my wife actually works at a school effectively, but it's like an outdoors school where children with special education, they come and they've got horses there and lots of animals and stuff like that. And then they've got porta cabins where they teach them, and it's children with who are somewhere on the autism spectrum or with severe learning difficulties, effectively can't operate inside a normal school set. Am I right in hearing that's similar to what you ran yourself?
Yep. So my service was a children's respite service. So we took children from 0 to 18 for short breaks, and they would essentially come and stay in our house, which was an adapted house for children with disabilities. And so we were open every weekend, and we would have a group of 3 or 4 children that would come and stay from Friday to Sunday. And we were also open full time in the school holidays. So every school holidays, it effectively meant I didn't see my own children, but we'd be taking other people's children for sort of week-long breaks to give the families and the siblings that break. So
what gave you the drive to want to do something like that? Because that is a colossal call. You know, that's a real commitment. That's the sort of thing. It's not a profession. That's a vocation, very much.
Yeah. So I kind of accidentally fell into that job. It just so happened that the service was actually around the corner from our house in our previous house that we lived in. So I just ended up working my way through the service there. I started as a relief worker and just really quickly just rose through and got promoted. So it just ended up 6 years later that it was my own service. I was really proud to work there. Absolutely adored the children I worked with, and I think that maternal side of being a parent as well. I did actually feel like I had about 50 children, but you know, it's a privilege to be in their lives, and for the families to trust you that much to, you know, care for the most precious thing in their life. So it was a great job, and I do have to say it was the hardest job I've ever had to leave. There was tears, but I was leaving to do something that was quite selfish for me, but it was a personal dream of mine. So
you know what, and I'm sure Jamie will agree. You've almost got to have that healthy aspect of selfishness, because we use it with so many negative connotations. We think it's quite an ugly word, but especially when you think about the example that you set for your children, you know, it's your life. You know, we'd have the audacity to encourage our children to go for it and do what they want to do, and not follow the crowd and not do what's expected of you, but do what you think is right, as long as morally you're not hurting or upsetting anybody else. But then there's also like an irony in that sometimes when you hear parents that say, oh no, I've got to keep doing this because I need to do X for my kids, or, you know, I just kept doing it for you, and all that sort of stuff. If you ask your kid when they're 18, they'd have said, no, you know, mum, dad, you should have just gone for it. You know, why didn't you just go for it? So there's almost the dichotomy within that where you really should go, because like you say, they're watching what you do, and when you tell them the stories of where you've come from and where you are now, that's incredibly inspiring, really.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you say. You know, we're quite young parents, and I think we're really open with the children as they're growing up. You know, they're getting to see us live out our careers, and the kids were involved really with my decision to leave my job. And they've seen the difference in happiness that it makes for me. And I've always said from when they've been old enough to understand, as long as you are happy with, you know, the decisions you make in your life as adults, you know, whatever job you choose to do, we're going to be proud of you, whether you choose to go to university or, you know, choose to go and do an apprenticeship, or just, I mean, our eldest child really wants to do diving. He wants to, you know, he's really interested in sharks and conservation. As long as they're doing what makes them happy, I could not care less what they're doing. As long as it's nothing criminal or anything like that. We'll, you know,
yeah.
As long as they are upstanding citizens, mum and dad will be proud, whatever they choose to do. So I'm glad that they can see that, because the change in my mood from starting this job is like night and day. The stress has just melted away.
Today's episode is supported by our good friends over at Duty Crew Coffee. Now, as you're probably aware, coffee is the most popular drink worldwide, with over 2.25 billion cups of coffee consumed every single day, and over 70 million of those in the UK alone. Most of this is consumed in our crew rooms, our watch offices, and by our emergency services frontline staff. So when you're getting together around the mess table, don't be drinking no nasty ass cheap coffee. Nobody likes that guy that brings the cheap stuff. Life is too short to be drinking crap coffee. So if you head on over to dutycrew.co.uk or click the link in the podcast below, you'll be able to jump on over and see the Duty Crew coffee products. They come in 227 gram oversized high quality recyclable standard pouches, and they are individually wrapped 10 gram coffee bags. They're quick, mess free, convenient. They have a one-way degassing valve, which is an absolute must for storage of freshly roasted coffee. You can get the 20-pack response bag. They've got the HQ, they've got the No Duff, they've got the Unity, the Decaf, and of course, all of their products are Rainforest Alliance certified, Fair Trade Foundation, and most importantly, they taste freaking epic. I started drinking Duty Crew about 2 months ago, and then when I fell in love with it, I got in contact with them and they came on board with the podcast. So jump on over to Duty Crew Coffee if you want some of the good stuff. Now back to the podcast.
Jamie, how do you think Jess's attitude and Jess's general demeanor has changed since she started this role? Rather than her telling me, how do you, because you got close up and personal, I would imagine. You're the on the front line of home life every day with her.
Yeah, it is huge. And I think it was a bit of a surprise to me just how huge it was. And unfortunately, I can't show you, but you know the whole thing of a picture paints 1,000 words and all. We were looking back at photos taken last November, and I mean this in the best possible sort of way. However, you can just tell from the picture that she's not like the Jess I've known for 14 years. She's a little bit withdrawn. You can sort of tell that she's exhausted and tired and just run down with work and
she looked
things
rough.
like that, you know, and not doing something for her necessarily with her time. A lot of it was soaked up with other people's time. And then she went away training in January, and then we've got a bunch of sort of family photos from Easter when she'd finished her training and was back just before she started on the shift proper. And it really was night and day. You know, just the glow has come back to her sort of thing. There's a lot more joviality around the house.
That must have been incredible to see.
Yeah, no, it
must have been quite difficult for you to have seen her keep pushing through something that you knew. Like, she was just, we're really great salespeople, aren't we? We justify things to ourselves because you're like, no, I do really enjoy it and it does mean so much to me and I do get so much fulfillment. But it's like this whole chapters of life analogy, you know, just because you've put so much in. And we also have that sort of, I forget what it's called now, it's called like investment bias, or commitment bias, where gamblers have it, where you've put so much into one thing where you're like, I don't want to pull out of this now. It's my career, it's my life. You know what I mean? I've put so much into it. If I just walk away from it, and you know, like I say, gamblers have that. They're like, oh no, I'm 10 grand in. I've got to keep playing until I win. I've got to keep playing until I win. And some people can have that aspect where they continue with something because they think it's what's expected of them. But that's why I always say to people about those chapters of life analogy, because there's always something new to move on to. You know, it doesn't mean you failed, doesn't mean you hate what you're doing. It just means you've still got an itch you still want to scratch. And it sounds like that was very much the case with Jess, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it came down to as well that, like, her previous career, as Jess has already said, she sort of fell into it a little bit. I was, and I do count myself quite lucky in this respect, that when I started with the police, we had Caleb, our eldest, and we made the decision that as to sort of manage childcare, that Jess would give up work, which was fine, you know, and it was a decision we made. And then I think, did you stay off for 3 or 4 years?
Yeah.
And that was through the birth of our second child, our daughter Aira. And it was only after that you wanted to go back to work more for adult contact, and then you just fell into your former job. And then from there, it just sort of kept tumbling on. And I think with the sort of journey you had trying to get into the fire service, it was trying to do something for you. And you'd spent, I mean, at the point of actually starting with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in January, that's 10 years given to the sort of kids exclusively, if you will. And I think that's what has sort of brought on the biggest change, is that for the first time maybe in a decade, she had the confidence to be selfish. And you know what I mean, that in the best possible sense of the use of the word selfish.
Yeah.
You know, I was selfish sort of 10 years previously and went away on training to join the police. I've been selfish in other ways in the previous 10 years that I'm sure we'll come on to in terms of personal sort of challenges and things away from work. And this was her opportunity to do that. And that's what's brought about the biggest change, because with that as just, I don't know, a sense of self-confidence, belief.
Yeah.
And
Which is so attractive as well, you know, without getting too personal. Like when you meet somebody and they're an individual, you know, when you first sort of meet somebody and fall in love with them, that confidence, that that personal, sort of ego, but like healthy ego, how they think of themselves is so attractive when they have that thing they want to do. And I wanted to ask you, Jess, when you had children, and because my wife, we've got 3 children, and you have to give so much of yourself to that person. You sacrifice your body, sometimes you sacrifice your career, sometimes you sacrifice so much about you that when you get through that, because it happens over so many years, they say it only takes 30 something days to embed a habit. So when you've spent 10 years, having 3 other people or 4 other people, including Jamie, something that you need to support, and they become so much of your identity. Did you ever lose sight of your own identity? I felt like I was hearing that when Jamie was talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of, now reflecting back on it, I totally lost all sense of who I was as Jess. I just became, with each child, I was just their mum. And I'm still kind of getting out of the habit of saying, I'm Caleb's mum, or I'm Amra's mum, or the littlest one, I'm Clark's mum. Now I'm meeting people, and for the first time in a decade, I'm Jess. I'm my own person. And, meeting people with the same interests, whereas for the last 10 years, it's been sort of meeting people who you wouldn't necessarily talk to, but it's because you're a parent.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have lots in common with these people, but if it wouldn't be for children, you wouldn't know them. So I'm meeting my kind of people with same interests. So I think that's made a big difference as well. Just being around people that I would, ordinarily gravitate towards.
Other than having the bravery to pursue a career that you knew you always wanted, could you give me an example of like a thing or a hobby or a thing that you refound or you reconnected with, or maybe even just something completely new? Because the Jess that went into having children would have been a completely different person to when you went out. Even if you have never had children, over 10 years, and you find this a lot with relationships, like we all grow at different rates. I always just say to my wife, because there was a period of time we separated for like 7 months, and it's like an elastic band between you. And we all, like children have different growth spurts, boys and girls, but even when we get adults, we have different growth spurts, don't we? Someone will catch a real swift wave on a certain career and they're just loving it. And you're like working whatever in Sainsbury's, or you're working somewhere that you don't love. I'm sure Sainsbury's is nice, but when you're working maybe with something that doesn't excite you, and you hear every day all the achievements that person's having, how engaged they are, how fulfilling their life is, and you support them, and you never want to take it away from them, but there's kind of that in limbo. Do you know what I mean? Like, what am I if other than a parent? Do you know what I mean? There's an aspect of that there.
Yeah. So what I found for myself is I actually really love being in the gym and lifting heavy weights, and it's not something I would have necessarily done. So that's something I've kind of found for myself. I mean, we're both runners. We both come from quite athletic backgrounds anyway, so I wouldn't say that's something I found for me. But having the confidence, learning how to be Jess again, to be I'm a woman that likes to be in the gym. I suppose there's not that many females that are in the gym lifting weights. I really enjoy that.
I think it's grown significantly over the last 10 years. I think whether people do or don't do CrossFit, I think that is an example of something that has made it more accepting. So it was all we had before that, women that lifted weights for like ginormous powerlifters or female bodybuilders. And some people may aspire to be that, but I would argue the vast majority probably don't. So there's that aspect where that strong independence and seeing your body change and seeing those marginal improvements and setting little goals, and I think it's a really healthy mental exercise as much as it obviously clearly is a physical exercise. You similar to like you're saying, you find yourself again emotionally, you find yourself again physically, because like we said, when you have children, so much of your body just becomes ravaged. I mean, for my wife, like she rides horses, and we've got a couple of horses ourselves. And when after different bouts of having children, when she would ride a horse, she would have various things that she hadn't had to face before with her body, like always worrying she's going to need a wee every 2 seconds, for an example, and other things like that. And as silly as that might sound to some people, that's a massively, genuinely real concern, and for a lot of people who feel like, I can't go there in case this happens and I just embarrass myself, so they just don't go. Having kids does have a massive effect on both physically and mentally. It's been quite the journey for us. How did you both meet? How long have you been together?
We met actually in the queue to get our keys for halls of residence at university in 2008. By sheer fluke, I suppose. I was behind her in the queue. And then later on that evening, as is probably common place at university these days, there was just like a courtyard outside, or shared sort of blocks of flats, if you will. Obviously, we weren't in the same flat, but we then just got chatting that night, and 14 years later, we're doing this podcast.
14 years later, we're still chatting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think either of us were particularly looking for any sort of relationship. We just started university, of course, but
yeah,
I think 3 or 4 weeks in, we were spending quite a lot of time together, and it just sort of grew in naturally.
But it was a friendship first.
Yeah,
So I think that's why it was different.
And then, as I say, it just then sort of grew quite quickly from there.
I think Jess thought it was a friendship to start with. I think Jamie was always like, yeah, sure, of course, yeah, we're friends.
I'm going to use a common police analogy and just say no comment.
Yeah.
Out of home, so I had not long turned 18, and that was my first sort of day of freedom when I met you.
You had all of these ambitions of going off and having adventures and meeting lots of lovely guys, and then you meet this schmuck 2 days in, and then it's like, couldn't shake him off.
I know.
You couldn't even understand my name because of my accent for
a
couple of hours.
That is, so if you can't tell by my accent, I'm from Wales.
Oh, really?
And yes, and I'd not really heard many accents outside of my little hometown. So meeting Jamie from Accrington, I actually thought you were called Jimmy when we first met. So that's our funny meeting story. But yeah, fast forwarded, and I was 19 when we got married. And
wow.
We finished our degrees, and I think 21 we had our first, I was 21 when we had our first child.
Mm-hmm.
It is you. I mean, it's probably not young by today's standards, with the greatest respect to some people, but I think, when did we first have? I was 22. Yeah, I was 22 when we had Lily, I think. What did you guys do your degrees in?
My degree is actually in policing and criminal investigation, which is a bit of a long story. If you want me to tell it.
Yeah, hit me with it, brother.
So Lancashire Constabulary, which would have been like my home county, if you will, came up with a trial back in the mid-noughties, which was that, similar to the NHS system, Hugh would, or me as a prospective candidate, would pay to go to university, and that would be the basis of my police training, if you will. At the end of that sort of program, I would have a degree, and I would sort of skip along to Lancashire Constabulary, and my basic legal training I would have paid for as part of my degree. And then it would have just been down to the force to sort of train me in officer safety training skills and, local policies and procedures and the like. And then I would be sort of ready to go out onto the street, rather than what is currently in place nationwide, which is that we sort of rock up and do 3 months residential training. So however, halfway through that degree, the financial crunches hit, and that whole sort of trial was put firmly to bed.
Jesus. So you obviously had to keep going, but there was no guarantee of anything at the end of your degree.
As Jess points out, I did meet her, so
it wasn't a complete waste.
Trade off.
I will say, I'm damned if I'm not getting nothing out of this. I'm going to scrape this relationship out of university. I'm not leaving with nothing.
Well, I mean, there was I sort of distinctly remember having a quite frank conversation about it, and it was much of the fact that by this point we were halfway through, so we might as well just commit to the other half. Hey, what's 20 grand of debt between friends?
Yeah. So Jesus Christ. So Jess, now that because I suppose Jamie is in his role long before you were. How did you deal with knowing the role that he does, especially when you were at home? Oh, I'm just even thinking now, because I'm learning more about you as we're having this conversation prior to me sort of making notes. But like, you were both effectively being supported by Jamie's income, because that's a decision you'd made. You were at home, obviously, with the children. How did you cope with knowing what the role of a police officer was like? Because it seems, from my very limited interpretation, I'm sure Jamie will sort of illuminate any things that I'm getting wrong, but it looks like it's getting harder. It looks like it's getting a little bit more violent. I don't see the respect and, you know, the sort of reverence that I used to have and certainly still do have for officers and things like that. Firstly, for yourself, Jess, how did you deal with knowing what Jamie did for a living, and how did you deal with that?
Well, obviously supported it, but being that person that's at home looking after the children, and say Jamie was on a night shift, it doesn't help with the worries. What if, something goes wrong on a shift? And I suppose you are hearing more things now, PC Harper and, other police officers that have been involved in tragic accidents. It's, that risk is always there. So it is always in the back of your mind. I suppose for, Jamie, you'll probably have some feelings about that too. I would say though, my main worries, I actually didn't like when you had your firearms ticket, and I will say that honestly, because I really didn't like the thought of anything going horrifically wrong and needing that to be used, because that's a life-changing decision for the officers that are on the other end of that as well. So I'm actually quite happy and content with where you are in your policing career. You've done a fair bit of different things, community and traffic and response, and I mean I feel like I've got to know people from your team from you talking about them, because we do talk about things at home. Just I think it's good for your mental health just to get a hard day off your chest with your spouse. We're here to support.
Has it changed at all since you joined the fire service? Because I'm sure before he would have told you stories about what police officers do, but now you'll be meeting them on jobs and things like that, and you'll be seeing what they really do. Is there any difference?
By chance, I could have bumped into Jamie today because we were both working day shift and we were both at the same job, but I met your colleagues instead, so introduced myself to them. No, we do still openly talk about how, and honestly, what jobs we've been to, because there are some jobs where you're not actually doing a lot, and that could just be for the amount of resources that are there, or the type of role that you've been assigned to. Like with all parts of the job, I guess there's good bits and there's bad bits and there's boring bits and exciting bits. So, that I don't think that has changed. I think you still tell me what you've been up to, and when I've had an exciting shift, because I come home bubbly and very chatty about it.
What about yourself, Jamie? How has things changed in terms of how you see the role of a police officer from when you joined? And Jess made a great point there around your firearms training and the decision to go into a different sector. And how do you see, and I know you don't speak on behalf of any service or anything like that, but just from a career perspective, how is the community now in terms of what it was like when you first joined?
Honestly, it's changed hugely. I mean, I started working in Leith, on the northern side of Edinburgh. Now, to anybody that's followed any sort of pop culture over the last few decades will know that Leith has a problem with heroin, if they've ever watched Trainspotting. However, what I would say is that we very seldom came across any sort of real dissent towards us, even our sort of general community of drug users, if you will. We're all quite decent folk, if I can say that. Yes, they were committing crimes, and yes, they would commit pet crime associated with their chosen addiction, but they were always okay. You very seldom came across real hatred towards us. That's not to say that you didn't end up dealing with like some sort of violent or highly aggressive thing, generally down to over intoxication or something.
Yeah.
But on the whole, it was quite okay. What I would say now has changed massively, and I can almost pinpoint it on. For me personally, when the George Floyd incident happened in the States, the number of phones now being used to record us and sort of comments generally about the state of policing in the USA, nothing to do with what's currently going on in the UK, sort of comes towards us, and it's the majority of the times from teenagers.
Who have not got a sodding clue, with the greatest of respect. Half the time, they've read some sort of right somewhere that is like ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's mostly based. And again, I'm not saying this from any position of knowledge, but I think from what they see on whatever the social media platform that's currently exciting the kids, would it be TikTok or Snapchat or whatever?
TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, most probably.
Yeah, these sort of things, and they see these videos, which are very Americanized, it has to be said. And we're getting quite a lot of brunt from our younger clientele in terms of just sheer hatred towards us.
It's so
without being
unfounded, though. They're not based on personal experience for them. That's what frustrates me so much. And, as some of the people we speak to down in London, we had Roy Wilshire on the podcast the other day, and he was saying, and Danny Cotton as well, she was the chief fire officer of London for a while. She said, like back in the 80s, they used to, when they go to incidents, they would have people pushing fridges off balconies onto the fire engines and trying to crush people, and they did it to the police as well. And you just think, what the hell was such a level of putrid hatred for people? I mean, not that I can understand it in the police, but like I certainly think, and I know I'm swinging onto Jess's team here, but I'm like, to some people, the police are there to either save you or they're there to ruin your day, if you're obviously one of the bad guys. But for the fire service, it really astonished me, because I'm like, we're just there to help. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you perhaps feel different if Jess had gone into the police service, but you feel that other than the younger members of the community, it tends to be quite civil, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, I would say, like, up here, it's certainly, like, now obviously I police quite a rural part of the world. The Scottish borders isn't massively populated. There's vast sort of fields and hills and such like, and on the whole, it's still sort of very oldie worldy in that regard. You still do get quite a lot of sort of decent respect and chat from sort of adults and older members of the community and things.
What's drink driving and road traffic collisions like around there? Sorry to interrupt. I just thought about it because
no,
in a lot of our rural communities, we find that a lot of drink driving still happens. Because it's just like, oh, well, the pub's only half a mile away. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, no, it is a major problem. I mean, like, there's no two ways around it. The fatalities on sort of Scottish borders roads are pretty much up there as number one priority.
Yeah.
As I'm sure they are in most rural locations, because of what you just said there, there's that sort of, it'll be fine. I'll not bump into a cop anyway. So, because we're sort of spread very far and wide, we do get our fair share of drink drivers, I would say, more than our fair share.
It's the speeds that people travel at on those roads as well, because, like I say, in the inner city stuff, you have a road traffic collision, it's 15 miles an hour, isn't it? It's nothing. I had a running joke with somebody. I was on a course with somebody from Oxfordshire the other day, and there's more cyclists around there than there are any vehicles. So I was like, road traffic collision, 2 bicycles involved, 1 person's scuffed knee. That's the sort of calls they must have coming in. But when you go into Scotland and Wales and certainly the rural areas of the UK, when you have those RTCs, they tend to be significantly faster, and like you say, thus the sort of life-changing injuries or fatalities are significantly higher as well.
Yeah, well, I would certainly say 90% of the roads surround us are national speed limit. Lots of them very rarely patrolled, purely down to numbers and incident sort of demand.
Yeah.
And 2 of them are trunk roads, so quite heavily used, I would suggest, for the part of the world. Maybe not by sort of England standards, but certainly by Scottish standards, very well used roads. But yeah, so you're talking 60 mile an hour plus, really. And if you hit anything at 60 miles an hour, it's not going to be a good day for anybody.
It's game over, isn't it? Sorry, Jess, I interrupted you.
I was just so when I was at the training college, my squad that I was training with went pretty much anywhere that wasn't Glasgow and Edinburgh. We were everywhere else in Scotland because we were the residential bunch. But I had predicted that maybe my first job when I got down to station would be an RTC, and it was in fact an RTC. So that was my very first day.
When was your first fatality?
I haven't actually had one yet.
Good.
I've been quite fortunate in that sense. I'm on my 2nd tour and have yet to experience that. It was really fortunate that the RTC I attended, the paramedics were already on scene and treating the person, but it was pretty bad leg injury, but survivable. I certainly didn't want it to distract me from the job and the skills and the empathy that I can bring to it.
I think you'll have massive amounts of empathy, far more so than other people. That's what I think is so lovely about people coming into the job at different stages of life, because they bring so much into the roles. When you guys are talking about the differences in what you do, what do you think are some of the biggest differences in the type of roles that you do? Because you're both community servants at the end of the day, but what are the biggest things that sort of stand out to you?
So we were just talking before about, how much training is involved with the firefighter's role. So, if we aren't out attending jobs, we are doing station jobs. So, today we were doing weekly and monthly tests on equipment. So we're making sure all of our equipment's functional and safe. And the amount of drills that we're doing, the amount of training that we're doing to keep our skill set up for any eventuality. So we are prepared to work safely when we do attend jobs. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big thing. It's a very practical training sense.
Mm-hmm. I think, like in the police, we don't do that much training. I mean, one of the big differences is every job we go to will create paperwork. Now, whether that be a social work referral or raising a crime report or, various other things that we might have to submit to appropriately write off that job, no matter where we are in our service. And obviously, like any job, like Jess was saying earlier there, that there was a job came in today that we were both technically at. As far as the fire service is sort of concerned, when they leave that job and the watch commander sort of writes it off, that's their end of it.
Yeah, it's just high fives and all that sort of stuff. Whereas exactly, we were all faffing about together and you're actually doing loads of work still.
That might still be an ongoing police inquiry, like in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, in terms of like witness statements and crime reports and managing that and the investigation required. And I think that's the major difference, is that we do go to quite a lot of jobs that are of similar nature, whether they be RTCs or whether they be fires or fire service helping us force entries into things that may be sudden deaths or concern for persons or missing persons, all that sort of thing. I would say you're quite training heavy and we're paperwork heavy.
We've just got so much stuff.
Not to make it sound like policing's dull.
Yeah, well, I feel for the police sometimes as well, because there's two sides to those coins, isn't there? Yes, we have to do loads and loads of training, but what that also means is we've got a massive toolbox full of stuff. I often see when the police turn up, I think the greatest weapon that they have, or the greatest tool they have, is their mind. It's their mind, their knowledge, it's their ability to navigate relationships and situations and build rapport quickly and, try and analyze the situation and pull out all the pertinent information, because there's often more of us. We've got a lot more kit. You guys have got, your jackets and some cones in the boot, I'm sure you've got lots of other stuff as well in a first aid pack, but I wanted to ask you about the aspects of teamwork and morale and sort of how that difference is, because obviously for Jess, she's probably always part of a team of 4, maybe sometimes more. Whereas, do police officers always ride with a partner, or do you often ride by yourself? Or
I suppose it's quite fortunate, really. But in Scotland, we still have like corroboration in law, so we can't do anything alone. Everything we do, well, if it comes to like arresting or interviewing people or anything of that sort of ilk, we need corroboration, unlike down in Englandshire. So, yeah, I would say 90% of the time we're still double crewed, at least, going out to jobs.
That's only all right if you get somebody good, though. I mean, you can have a crew of 4 people, and if there's one dickhead, then it's okay, because the 3... But if there's only 2 of you, and you don't like the person you're with, it's a rough shift.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in quite a few different stations now, and currently I'm on a reasonably big team. I say reasonably big by Borders standards, so 6. So that's quite good, because you get the different sort of dynamics of different people. You work with different people on a daily basis. So even if you work with the same person for 3 or 4 shifts, you come back into the station where there's other people to talk to. So that can be quite it's certainly a healthier working environment. That being said, in the past, I've done a couple of years working with one guy, just 2 of us for 2 years. And
what's he like?
No comment.
He's great. He's very professional. He's very good at his job. He's very funny. He's very, very, very nice.
I mean, there's only so many things you can speak to somebody about, I always think.
Yeah.
Before a conversation starts to dry up, and after 2 years, I'm sort of running out of interesting things to say about myself, to be honest.
You find that, I'm sure Jess will have that if she hasn't had it already, but like when you have a stack fire or something like that out in the middle of nowhere, You're there for like 6 or 7 hours, just babysitting this thing as a control burn, and you find out somebody's entire life story. I bet you have that more probably than we do, because like you say, there's always a few of us to chat to, but for the two of you, it's just non-stop one-to-one.
You do just spend a lot of time in a car talking, ultimately. I suppose just like any sort of normal friendship, you eventually just end up talking nonsense for the most part.
So here you go then, Jess. What do you think is one of the things that is probably a pet peeve of Jamie's partner, as in Jamie's work colleague? Is there anything you think Jamie does that you think the colleague would be like, oh God, he's talking about that again, but don't say it?
Sorry, I'll stop laughing in a minute.
Thanks.
Jamie's hobbies can be quite all-consuming.
Nice, so, I like it.
Jamie loves to run.
Jamie loves to run.
And don't we all know it?
Is he always talking about his times and his splits and the different trainers and the people that he watches and different techniques? And
well, he just I wouldn't say you do that, but he's a trail runner, so he's just always up hills basically. As the long suffering wife, I get told about everything that's going on in the trail running world. And
hey, I've seen you out there as well. I've seen you and the kids on the Instagram. So don't be saying like you don't do it.
I'm maybe a little bit quieter about it. But I mean, this year's been really quiet on the events calendar for you, because with me training and you moving teams, we didn't quite know what our shift patterns were going to be. So. You weren't booked in any races, but in previous years you've done some really big races that have sort of taken you away for a few days, and your partner will have had to listen to your training plan probably, because you get quite obsessive over your training plans down to every fine detail.
So it should be.
But
exactly.
Yes, but
exactly.
We all live in Jamie's,
not here to mess about, so we're here to compete. All right. So what's some of the stuff you've been involved with, Jamie? Go on, sorry.
What I would say in my quick defence is that Jess books a lot of these races for me. So
it's what she's so quiet at home.
Now, there's something about that, and I want to sort of just spin off on a little bit of a tangent, Jamie, and ask you about, what is it about that physical aspect? Because you're 32, 33 now. I've competed in lots of different sports.
I wish.
Oh, sorry. How old are you?
Older than that, 36. Ugh.
I'm still a baby, really, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But we're at a different chapter of life now. We're at a different stage of our physicality. That I know there's stuff I can't do. I used to do lots of different strength sports and stuff like that, and had loads of different injuries. But I still think it's important to have the sort of healthy competitive mindset and be able to have something that tickles your pickle. That really challenges you. What sort of stuff have you done in the past, and what keeps you wanting to do some sort of competitive drive, or have a plan, or be able to see that you're making progress in something?
Running, some things I've always done. It came from school and things. I was always in the running teams at school. Through university, I certainly joined the athletics club, but I don't think I ever went. I think I just ate ice cream and drank beer for the most part. So it sort of fell by the wayside. But it initially kick-started again in my sort of mid-20s as just a means to get back fit after university. And then maybe it's a personality flaw of mine of becoming obsessive. I don't know. But there's just this incessant need to go further than I've gone before. So shorter runs grew into marathons, and marathons have grown into ultramarathons. And
you're doing ultras. Jesus.
Yeah, ultramarathons have grown into sort of multi-day events and things like that. And there's this sort of need to go further and higher and gnarlier. So while Jess says trail running, a lot of it's now becoming mountain running and ridge running, because it's the sort of next step in my journey, if you will.
There's a lady I had on the podcast recently runs something called, I think it's called the Spine Race or something like that.
I've not done the full spine, but I've done it.
Oh, is that what it is called? That was a bloody pull. Yeah, pull that out of the back of my mind.
Called the Spine Sprint.
It finishes near us.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
That's pretty colossal. What sort of stuff have you challenged yourself in? Because for anybody that's unfamiliar, just run us through the quick, what is a marathon classed as, what is an ultra classed as, and then what is beyond that?
Well, so in its basic form, obviously a marathon's 26.2 miles, and then an ultra marathon is anything above 26.2 miles. So technically, at 26.3, you've done an ultra marathon. That being said, pick a number as high as you want, and they carry on going. My big event last year, which ultimately ended in a did not finish, was 460 kilometers.
What a pussy!
had I have got all the way there, but I didn't.
That is incredible. Wow.
It's just, it's different. It's not about, like I know you were saying before, it's not about sort of stats and what your minute mile is. It's just about getting to the next bit. That next bit might be 200 meters down the track, or it might be 5K over the next hill. It might be whatever. And there's multiple different formats and distances. And it, even from, like, I've done a few events in Scotland where I'm lining up against elites, like sort of professionals of the sport from Team Solomon and Team Innovate and all these sort of. But in this world, you can be on the start line next to them. I mean, I'm never going to keep up with them, but it's still a sort of, for a minute at least, I'm in the same bit of them.
How do you develop the mindset for some of the long distance stuff? Because for some people like me will only know of the crazy stuff, the David Gogginses of the world and all that sort of silliness. But even I don't even think he's doing those sort of distances, because they started doing like 100-mile ultras and didn't they and stuff like that. But I think I remember reading like Ross Edgley's book when he swam around the UK, and they said it's not really a physical event past a certain point. It just becomes a mental thing.
It does massively. I think there comes a point, certainly for me, and I can only assume for everybody else, where most of me is broken, and it just becomes an incessant need to keep plodding forwards. And there was an ultra just the other day close to where we live, which I did a few years ago, and I got speaking to a friend about it and speaking to Jess about it, and I still don't actually have much memory of the last 20 miles of it.
Really?
You got told off a lot.
I got told off a lot, and I think I tried to eat ice cream a lot.
I said you spent all year training for this. You're bloody well finishing it.
Love that.
I don't know. It's just a goal. It's multifaceted to me. I think A, I enjoy it. It gives me a sense of satisfaction. B, it de-stresses me.
Yeah.
Like Jess knows if I've not been out for a run, and she'll tell me to bugger off and go for one and come back happier. If I've had a rubbish day at work, I'll go out for a run and I'd normally come back like brand new. That's it. It's all put to bed. Similarly, I can quite happily just plod along the trail for 4 or 5 hours and not really think about anything. And I
it
find
takes so bloody long, though. That's the only thing that frustrates. I mean, I'm 19 stone, so I swim, and I do run, but I run a couple of miles and try and hit it at a fast pace, and then everything else is like Jess. I'm just throwing weights around all the time like a bloody gym monkey. But I find it hard because I do have I have that desire to explore different realms of my physical capability. It's just the time commitments for something like an average run. It's still going to take you like 3 hours to do just a normal training run. I'm like, that's such a block of time.
Yeah, I think if I'm in a big training block, it maybe be 12 to 14 hours a week of running.
Jesus.
Yeah, you've done some insane.
Sort of looking at, I don't know, like 150k a week, maybe.
Yeah, that's what one of my friends was saying. I think he said it wasn't that bad. It was like 140k, and he says I'll probably try and split it over 4 or 5 days, but I've got to get them in. And you're just like, Jesus.
It just becomes an incessant need, setting an alarm at 3:30 and getting up at 4 to run before work. And
that's the challenge, getting it in with a full working week as well.
Yeah, running home from back shifts. So like, I'll set off home and run the long way home at midnight after a back shift, just to squeeze training in.
Mate, that is weird. I love that. I absolutely
most
love
of
that.
the police think it's pretty weird as well, to be honest.
Yeah. Do you listen to stuff when you run? Do you listen to music, or do you just run?
No, a lot of people find that really strange, but no, I don't.
Mate, I saw that when, and I know it just like became like an Instagram thing or whatever. But I think it was Goggins as well, and he was like, I never listen to music. He says because life hasn't got music to it. So if I listen to music and I become reliant on the music, and I haven't got the music when I'm running, then what am I going to do? Where does your head go when you're like that? Because I would struggle. My mind is like, I'm a recovered addict, so my mind is not a good place at times. And if I don't give it something to just entertain itself within the corner, it goes everywhere.
Honestly, I just let it go where it wants, normally. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes, like, if I've had a rubbish day at work, it'll go there. But it's generally the time I used to put everything into perspective, or maybe just put maybe a little bit of a demon to bed or something like that. And I don't know. I've just never ever run to music. It's just not. I'm not a massive music person at all, really. And I don't know. Honestly, a lot of it is away in the countryside, up hills or up mountains, and I just quite enjoy looking at what I'm looking at for the most part and just plodding along. Quite content. It's weird.
Dude, that's got to give you such a really great grounding from just like a mental health perspective as well.
I suppose it's the nearest thing I could probably achieve to meditation because I'm far too impatient to meditate.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's very similar in the fact that it's just plodding along and letting my mind do what it wants.
Well, we get confused when we talk about meditation because everyone has this image of meditation of like the sitting in the lotus position, saying Om. If you actually look, if you look into meditation, things like the tea ceremony came out of meditation, and some of the original forms of meditation were things like archery, where it's just your ability to focus on one thing, and then when your mind starts to wander off, that's okay. It's just like when your kid runs off in the field, they're going to come back anyway. So just let it wander off and it will come back and it will sit back down again. And it's just your ability to keep hitting that reset button and keep hitting that reset button and focusing on one task. So running, 100%, running is meditation. I find lifting weights is monotonous. It's all the same. It's numbers, it's reps, it's repetitions, but it's your ability to try and focus in on a singular task. So no, I totally agree with you. It's definitely meditation.
Well, there you go then. You've made me feel good. I now meditate on a 5 times a week basis.
How do you feel about Jess working in a male-dominated environment?
It doesn't really bother me. A lot of like the people or the guys that Jess works with, I've sort of met them out at incidents over the last decade anyway. If I don't know them to name, I sort of know them by face. And, just by sort of sheer coincidence, we've met a few sort of firefighters who we would consider friends whilst we've been down here prior to Jess joining. So it doesn't really bother me a great deal. For a decade, I've worked in like that sort of team mentality, if you will. And I know it's just the same world. Everyone's got each other's back, and that's that, really.
Did it ever be a factor for yourself, Jess, when you were coming into the job? Because for some women, they find it quite nerve-wracking, and there's this idea that firefighting, we used to call it, they used to call them firemen, didn't they? And there's some people have this analogy in their head that they need to be a certain type of person or a certain sort of thing, and that can sometimes feed into the belief that some people think they can't do it.
Yeah, so I think if you were to meet me, I think most people judge me wrongly. I'm 5'2", 50 kilograms, and I'm very girly on the outside, and I love proving anybody wrong. So I'm anything but girly behind closed doors. I've relished the challenge of joining the job and proving that I'm just as capable of all the, of doing the job role that everybody else who's in the job is. The fitness standards are what the fitness standards are. I know that in previous years they've changed over the years, but I've earned my place there today as everybody else who was on my training course. So I feel really, really proud about that, and I'm in a job with people who are like-minded. I've come from a very female-dominated environment. Health and social care is, heavily female-dominated. It's very rare to come across males in the job, unless you tend to get them in management, but not so much as a manager managing a team. And I was quite looking forward actually to seeing what the other side is like working as a minority. So just to see how it works from the other end.
Do you find it like a secret superpower? How do you find it being one of the minorities?
I find it like a secret superpower. I love it. I do love that I do have the whole changing rooms, and don't have to fight for anything like that. But it's nice. I feel well protected. I am now the only female at the station that I work at.
Did you kill the other one off?
Well, I
we're not having that. There's another one coming. No, I'm gonna put that job.
Welcome in. But she just recently moved across into the prevention and protection team, which is fantastic for her. I think she's been operational for over 20 years, and I really hope I get that for my own career. But that has left me the only female there now, and it doesn't bother me whatsoever. I'm not intimidated at all by working in a male dominated environment.
Good.
feel more than comfortable to. I'm quite happy to stick up for myself. I'm quite feisty.
Well, the hope would be you don't need to. Like, it's good to have that banter and rapport and everything like that, but
yeah, I can take a joke, but also it's not, I'm not going to feel upset that there's not that many of me around. I'm a social person. I'll speak to anybody and everybody. Yeah, if you meet me in person, I'm a very smiley and bubbly person, and I think that does win people over. So I quite quickly build relationships with people, and I've made myself, my little home at my station quite quickly. Sort of established my, working relationships there.
I know you were very early on in your career still, but what has been, I suppose for both of you really, what have been any of the sort of the biggest challenge or sort of the toughest day that you've had at work?
I suppose it was a few weeks ago, actually. It was probably the biggest job I've had to date. It was actually the first night I was running as number 3. We had a bit of a joke that it was a night shift, and who would be my BA partner, the number 1, he said, "Oh, there'll be a big BA job going tonight." And at 3:00 in the morning, we were sent out to a swimming pool roof alight. It was quite surreal, actually, and it was one of those moments where it just kind of reaffirmed why I was doing what I was doing. I do feel very privileged that, through the training that I've had, there's not that many people that will ever get to experience the sights that you see. So being in a building full of smoke and just being part of it, and working as part of a team, the general public will never see that. And it is
so surreal, isn't it?
It is very surreal. But also at the same point, I was, very happy to be there, and I do feel very glad that I'm in the job.
What about for yourself, Jamie? What's one of the toughest days you think you've had in the job?
There's been a few incidents, but one I could probably say was the toughest was discovering somebody who had been sex trafficked to the UK. And this was a few years ago now, but it's just, I think prior to joining the job, or somebody that doesn't work in the job or anything like that, or doesn't normally get exposed to this sort of thing other than in sort of the press, it's quite weird and surreal seeing somebody who was, I mean, at the time I was still quite young and fresh-faced as well, but younger than I was. I'm, by my definition, still quite immature, but had been trafficked to the UK from her own country simply for the purposes of an illicit sort of sex industry. And sort of having to deal with that, and the fact that there's still young women primarily that are sort of targeted for the sex trade and brought into, well, this country, and I think from the outside,
massive. It's massive.
Yeah, huge. And, and this is going on like underneath our noses, and gladly, like, thankfully, 99% of the population are completely and blissfully unaware of it, and that's the way it should be. That's our job as public servants, isn't it? Sort of keep that at bay to most people. But it still sort of hammered home the message that amidst all the sort of nonsense jobs and jobs that sort of take time but aren't always that exciting, you do have some real life, quite scary, quite worrying things going on, where people are being put in some quite horrible positions, and they're young, and in theory they should have their whole lives ahead of them, but that will undoubtedly have an impact on that young girl's life forever. And I will never, I'll never be privy to what is going on in her life now. I was just a part of it for a very small period of time. I'd like to think that I helped in some small way. Maybe I started something, maybe I didn't, but I think it still lives with me today to a certain extent, of just, no matter how blasé you can come with the everyday mundane jobs that you go to, there is these things going on out there that we're really there to try and help with.
Yeah.
And you said yourself, you got children. I've got a daughter, and the thought of her being put in that position is just repulsive, really. It's one of the few things that I can sort of genuinely say sickens me, and it was tough. Still is, not to the point that it affects me mentally or anything like that, but it's just something that lives with you and will always live with me. It's just that these things go on.
Just comes into your mind every now and again, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and
it does. Yeah,
and you still can't fully comprehend it, and then it leaves again. But the strangest of things trigger it. I always think we don't fully know what's going on everywhere. I mean, society and communities in general are quite fractured now because I think we live isolated lives, even though we're all on social media and all that silliness. How many people really know what's going on next door? I think we go to so many illicit drug factories where they've short-circuited something or they've bypassed the electrics. And, no one on that street, well, maybe one or two people will probably know, but literally like nobody else knew what was going on in that house. And you go in there and you realize that the doors are locked from the outside and there's a false door on the front of the house because there's somebody in there that's been trafficked over to look after the grow or look after the stuff, and people come in and drop them off food, but they're a prisoner. They never leave that house. And often, sometimes, the reason that it's caught fire is because that person's sometimes maybe had enough or they've made a mistake, and then they just break out and leave. And then it gets found. And I think so many people are completely unaware of it, and myself included. I don't know everybody on our street. I don't really know what's going on at number 6 or whatever.
You are right, and that's what it is. I mean, unfortunately, I think we all, in both roles, rely quite heavily on the community telling us stuff. That's where we build our intelligence pictures and things. But like you say, we are quite fractured now, and we live in our little isolated bubbles. I think the majority of people, and I understand this, and I don't begrudge them at all, are quite happy to be blissfully unaware of what goes on, and I get that, and I envy it in a way sometimes.
Well, it's the burden of knowledge, isn't it, sometimes when you're in the job, because these things are happening. So it kind of puts a different filter over the way you look at situations, the things you see when you go into town, the way you react around certain groups, and the way you may encourage or discourage certain behaviors or go into certain places, or even just putting yourself in certain situations. And half the time there'll be no merit to what you're saying because something's not going to happen, but because you have seen it happen, you're like, no, we're not going to do that, or just don't do that.
Yeah. It's certainly, having been to one too many sort of fatal road traffic collisions, I can't say I was ever all that bothered about sort of traffic stuff, but now, I've seen, and it's not necessarily the collision in of itself and dealing with the initial aftermath. It's everything that comes after, going and visiting the family, the children of that person, or, the wife, husband, brother, sister, whatever it may be, and having to tell them about what has happened, and you see the significant impact that it has thereafter.
I forget that's what you have to do as traffic officers, isn't it? You have to do the doorstep conversation.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's no easy way to do it, really. You've just got to do it. You've just got to get on with it, really. I mean, that's what we're sort of trained for, is just to be quite blunt and honest about it, because there's no other way to be. The sort of empathy comes after. The first bit, you just got to get on with it.
That's got to be quite horrific.
It does paint a, like, if Jesse's driving anywhere, for instance, and I've never been this sort of person, really, ever, but now I'm like, just let me know you've got that. Then I can switch off. Do you know what I mean? And that ultimately comes from the job, nothing else. But it does sort of infiltrate everything in that regard. Going shop, like, even just going into the supermarket. Am I going to bump into somebody I arrested yesterday? Or
God, I never really think about that as well. Like, because you do hear about officers being attacked in their communities sometimes. Because if you live and work in a community, like you say, you might be on the school run, or you might be doing something with your kids somewhere and see somebody.
That is the biggest thing for me, is the kids.
We've had it at the doctor.
Yeah, I have had it once in the doctor's surgery. Now, the person in question, it comes to the attention of the police quite regularly. And for whatever reason, in my role as a community officer a few years ago, we had quite a good rapport, like professional rapport, if you will. And I did manage to get quite a lot from him. And, however, we unfortunately share a doctor's surgery. So, I was down there with, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the kids was maybe just getting their inoculations as babies or something like that. And he stood in front of me trying to speak to me. And you're a bit like, well, I'm here with my children, and I don't really want to discuss yesterday's incident because it's not really appropriate right now.
Yeah.
And you get that. I mean, and this particular guy in question, he isn't a violent or aggressive man, so I'm not worried in that respect. But I still don't particularly like the fact that he knows just from that small snippet of information that I must live locally.
Yeah.
And B, that I have kids.
It is a strange invasion of
there's
privacy.
There's that awkwardness to it. You don't really want to. I don't want the two lives to sort of merge.
No, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Whereas for firefighters, you're probably even quite proud of it. You know what I mean? You go around wearing your flipping fire service t-shirt everywhere you go. I know I'm one for it. For God's sake, I run the bloody podcast. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, because you like to think that people look at you as a source of, strength or, moral compass within the community, and that you're, somebody that can be approached if something happens or somebody needs help or something like that. People will tend to identify you as a, people on the street know, Jamie and Jess as firefighters and police officers, so it almost comes with a unspoken expectation that if something happens, so and so will probably do something, because that's what they do.
There is that, certainly, from both of us. It just gets awkward when you're with one of the kids, because you can't just run off. You still have that responsibility for the mini thing you created next to you, and you can't just sort of abandon your responsibilities for that. So there is that sort of awkwardness to it sometimes. As well, where does my moral compass lie here?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it always has to fall with your child, because
they're
your ultimate
100%.
responsibility.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody would ever sort of
begrudge you for that, no.
But yeah, exactly. But it does come with its degree of awkwardness.
What did the children think about what you do, Jess?
Well, I actually got the opportunity to go and do a school visit with the school that my children are at just a couple of weeks ago, actually.
Nice.
I did actually think, so my eldest is 10 now, and he's fast approaching that age where parents aren't cool, and I thought he might be sort of wanting the ground to swallow him up, because we went and engaged with the whole school, just doing water safety campaigns. And when he got home, I actually said to him, you weren't too embarrassed by mum today? And he was like, no, it's pretty cool. My mum's a firefighter. And it was lovely, actually, because they, in Scotland, they've all got, when they get to a certain year group in the junior side of the school, they get iPads to do their work on. And his teacher came out and got a picture of us together with some cutting equipment. And he was really quite proud of that. He doesn't smile much. He's quite solemn. You don't get many smiles out of him these days, because he's getting old and too cool for those kind of things. But it was really quite nice to see still that little child inside, and that is proud of me. My daughter absolutely loves it, because it's just kind of rebelling against some aspects of society still expect of women.
Yeah.
And our youngest is 3, and he's the third child is the wild one. He absolutely loves both. He loves both our roles, to be fair. Yeah. But being very much into Paw Patrol, I would say that the firefighter is the more exciting one of the two.
So what do you think? What's your thoughts, Jamie? What do you think the kids think about what you
scowling.
do? Sorry, what was the question you just asked? Sorry.
What do you think the kids think about what you do? Because yours is perhaps a little bit scarier, or it certainly would be for me.
I'll be honest, I don't think they've really ever considered it as anything other than what it is. Like, I don't think they're particularly afraid. I don't get the impression that they're afraid of it. I think it's just always what Dad's done. Dad just disappears off and goes and does policing. Like, they just ask me the random questions of, do you lock any bad guys up last night? And I think they're still too young to sort of appreciate it.
Yeah.
And they still view it as the sort of cartoon sort of thing that, I'll catch somebody with a swag bag and in black and white stripes, and I'll put them in a jail, and I think that's quite cool.
Yeah.
I've periodically sort of swung by the house if I've forgotten my lunch or something like that, something random, and I'll be parked outside and we'll come out and have a look at the car and stuff, and I'll drive off with the lights and sirens on just for the giggle.
Nice.
Well, you've got to, haven't you?
Absolutely. Always, every time.
I still think that they're all of that age where they just think it's quite cool. No matter where in communities we drive through, whether it be a deprived one or quite a wealthy one, you still get young kids waving at you because they think you're cool.
I always think that's funny when you think about career days and stuff like that, because you'll have somebody that says, "Oh, my dad runs the biggest construction company in Scotland," and then you're like, "Yeah, my dad's a police officer, so nobody cares what your dad does." No one cares about a construction company, or your dad, your mum runs a massive accounting firm. You're like, "Yeah, that's boring though."
Yeah. Well, I think I did the same as Jess and went into the school a couple of weeks previous to you did.
Yeah.
And I didn't get to see our eldest, Caleb, but the other two were just quite delighted, and they were all just like, I could hear all their little pals and stuff just going, oh, "There's Ira's dad, or there's Clark's dad," and they still, even to this, well, not now because they're on summer holidays, but I'd still get sort of random 4-year-olds coming up to me at the nursery drop-off going, "Clark's dad, have you arrested somebody?"
It's cool. I like it. So it should be.
And they find it sort of amusing. Now, I think if you were to ask me that question in about 3 or 4 years' time when Caleb's 14, it might be a completely different answer.
Yeah, that's when Jess might stay cool, and you may struggle in that bit.
Maybe and certainly as he approaches, I guess when he approaches 18, it'll go one of two ways. I'll either be a taxi service for him, and or he'll think it's incredibly annoying that I'm outside the nightclub on a Friday evening that he's coming home.
I wanted to drill down into some personal bits and bobs, just to try and get a greater understanding for the drivers of each of you. So, who eats the healthiest when you're at home?
Jess.
That's because you don't eat any form of salad or vegetables. That's
crazy, considering you've got the whole training regime on.
Yeah, but you see, when you run sort of 150k a week, you can eat what you want and stay thin. It's fine.
Really does. Eat a load of rubbish, but you can run it off.
Yeah.
So that kind of kicks me in the foot for the next one about who do you think is the laziest?
Jess.
This is surprising. I am lazy. I'm a lazy runner. So if he takes me out on a run, I do nothing but complain after about 5 miles.
Well, that's the thing as well, though, because I love going and doing different things, but my brother-in-law is big into his running and his open water swimming, but I just can't do I choose not to do the distances, and he is sincerely a lot fitter than me in that aspect of fitness. I like to do stuff with him, but I'm always like, this isn't going to be a great run for you, because I can do like 5 miles. I could probably push for 10, but you're going to be bored by then, because I would just run so much slower than you do.
It's the attention span for me. I'm quite happy to do something, but if it goes on for much longer than sort of an hour,
that's what I'm saying. It's like, we're gonna do it for a real one today. If you want to come, you can come, but it's a 3-hour loop. Oh no, why can't we 3 hours? Really? I've got stuff to do. Who is the most driven in either life goals or career goals, or who is the one with the plan?
Jess.
Nice.
I would say in terms of career, Jess. Obviously, in terms of hobby, me. I spend more time on my hobby than I would do in my career.
Yeah.
And Jess, quite the opposite, I would say.
Yeah, I've always been sort of the geek, the teacher's pet, the SWAT at school. And I think that's just transpired into whatever I've done for paid employment.
It'll serve you well, though. It'll certainly serve you well in what you do now, because you can never learn it all in a job like this. We've started doing loads of incident debriefs and stuff on the podcast, because this is how my sort of passion ended up manifesting. It's just that you get so fascinated by things even outside of your own service, stuff that's happening all over the world, and the things that people experience and how we can learn from them. But you have to try and walk that fine line of not becoming an anorak. And I don't know which side of that spectrum I sit on sometimes.
I think that's what I love so much about the job I'm in now, because it's such a massive job. There's so many different elements to it. There's so much, so many different tools to learn and master, and I'm just right at the very start. So I'm just so keen to get in and learn as much as I can.
I always like to ask people around leadership, because it's a very personal thing, and what are some of the characteristics you think make a great leader, or that you've seen in some of the leaders that you've worked with?
Yeah, I stepped into a management role the year before COVID. And realistically, I was managing a team that were more qualified than I was, but they actually told me to apply for the job, and I got it. So I think for me, it's something about being a good leader is not thinking that you're better than the people that you're working with, and utilizing the years of experience and knowledge within the team that you've got, and empowering the people that are within your team, giving them some autonomy to make decisions that they are capable of making, within their job role. And I do think that the way I empowered the team that I managed really helped to develop a bond between what was essentially a very broken team before I started. It really helped that I had a fantastic manager, and he managed me in that very same way. And somebody who's really just passionate about what they're doing. You get the people that are in the job because it pays the bills, and then you get the people who are in the job because they genuinely do care about what they're doing. And I've been really fortunate to be managed by people like that. I'm managed by people like that in the fire service now. I think my watch commander's been operational for 42 years, and he lives and breathes the fire service, and he's grown with the fire service in the direction that it's gone over the years. I can imagine it was a very different job when he joined, but he's just so passionate about it, and I feel really fortunate that I'm learning, as a brand new probationer from somebody like him, because
40 years, Christ,
that's everything I want from a job. I've looked, I've driven past Gal Shields for the last how long have we been here, since 2014 in the borders. So 8 years in the borders. I've driven past Gal Shields fire station. I curiously looked in and wished that that was a dream job for me, and I do pinch myself every day that I'm coming in and getting paid to do this. This is my dream job, and I can only liken it to a child wanting to be an astronaut. I am living my dream now, and I want to do my job to the best of my ability, and to be mentored by people who absolutely love their job, and they are at the my watch commander retired and came back, so
I love that.
Retired in 2009 and came straight back. So I'm working. I just it's that kind of profession that I hear people at the end of their career wishing they could go back and start all over again, or they have come back. It's just so inspiring for me.
It is one of those sort of jobs that people really struggle with when they're leaving, because it becomes such a massive part of their identity. Sometimes I always try to say to people that, remember, you are more than just your job, but when it's something you really love, it does become so much of your world. What about yourself, Jamie?
I think in the time I've been in the police, the sergeants that I've always gravitated towards the most are those that are sort of quite empathetic towards the team's needs. And by that, I mean whether that be sort of childcare needs, or whether it's well-being, mental health, that sort of thing. But somebody that's really make sure that they're quite aware and abreast of what's going on in their team, so that they can manage that person. When you've got a sergeant in front of you who you genuinely feel has your back, and by that I mean not just at the next job you go to, as in standing behind you and doing it, but in terms of what you need for family support, what you need for mental health support, physical health support, anything else that you might need. I always feel, I do, and I sort of get the impression it is from others, that they will go the extra mile for that person. Anything you give them, you're going to get back in spades anyway. And I think that's what I look for in a manager. And should I ever go for promotion,
I think you both will, because I think you've got, even just the ability to come on and have a conversation like this says you've got a great deal of self-awareness, and that you're willing to demonstrate that humility, because that's sometimes the hardest part for people, showing that they have that human aspect to them. Some people think as a leader or as a manager they need to display this image of perfection. They need to be the font of all knowledge, and that's just not sustainable for anybody. And also it takes away the power for other people to feel significant, as though they can contribute something to you that might help you, as if you're just this infallible perfection being, then how can we ever have this reciprocal relationship where I add value to you and you add value to me?
Well, one thing my tutor said to me all them years ago, and something I've tutored a few times now, and I'll be tutoring again with a new starter who just came in today, actually. You're getting on okay when you're comfortable knowing that you don't know anything. It's true. You never do know anything, ultimately. That doesn't make a difference whether you're a PC or a sergeant or an inspector or a firefighter or watch commander or whatever the other ranks are in that service, being self-aware enough to say that I don't know is fine. It's impossible in our small little brains to know everything that's going on, and and sometimes it's okay just to do the best you can operationally as the incident's going on, and then take the time later to in the police we've got standard operating procedures. I'm sure you've got something similar in the fire service where you look over and go, right, I've got this and I've done this. What am I doing with it now? What have I got? And for instance, just a quick example, we had a job involving a drone today. Now, I am no master on drone legislation by any stretch of the imagination, because it's impossible for me to know every piece of legislation ever enshrined into law.
Yeah.
And, and I went back in and my sergeant said the same thing. It's like, I don't really know either. And that's fine, rather than sort of lying and saying, and just skulking off, it's like, well, let's just sit down together at the computer and we'll figure it out and we'll come up with an answer. And I think that, it's quite empowering both ways. I see a manager, who isn't portraying this sort of big I am sort of mentality. It's quite democratic in its leadership style.
Yeah.
I feel empowered as a cop contemplating promotion. It's okay not to know everything.
Yeah.
It's okay to come back in and look at it with the legislation in front of you, the computer, the statement that you've taken, and coming up with an answer. That's okay. And I think that's what I would like to be like.
What do you admire most about each other? If we go for yourself first, Jess, what is one sort of characteristic or trait that you admire most about Jamie that you perhaps hope maybe the children will adopt or something like that?
What I admire most about you is I do think you're passionate about what you do, and I do genuinely think that you care. You make a difference to people in the community. I appreciate that you have a harder time. I don't think police are always seen as the good guys within the community, but you always see the best in people, even the ones that are kind of giving you grief. You speak to people with respect, and that for me is, it can be very easy to get wound up by somebody who's giving you a lot of grief. You speak to them with dignity and empathy and compassion, because you don't know what that person's going through. And I think probably underestimate the difference that you could be making in somebody's life without realizing.
Love that. What about yourself, Jamie? What do you admire most about Jess?
I mean, the greatest example of it is the sheer amount of effort it took to get into the fire service, but it's just tenacity, I suppose. I mean, failure, to fail at something, such a negative term, but it doesn't have to be. It's also like an opportunity to learn and get feedback. And if anything, Jess does that all the time with everything. And in terms of a lesson to all three kids and the other people that she'll come into contact with throughout her service, really, is it's okay not to succeed that first time or the second time or the third time. It doesn't really matter. If you want it enough, just keep trying. It'll get there. But nobody else has got her up every morning and made her train. And the strength training was something that she's taken on hugely. But there's nobody else is going to get up and do it. It has to be her. It's just all those little things like going out and networking and making acquaintances at local fire stations and getting involved, and it all takes ultimately tenacity and a degree of self-respect and things, to not get put down by anything, and it just doesn't seem to faze her at all.
Yeah, and that really is quite a rare thing these days. People can take those knockbacks and just think,
yeah, exactly.
I'm not looking stupid again. I'm not, everyone knew I was going for it and I didn't get it, and I'm just not going for that again because it's too embarrassing.
We do sort of have that, and I don't know whether that's a problem in modern society. Give up when it gets sort of too tough, and we'll just accept our lot and things. There's other things that she wanted to go and achieve, and it takes a bit of, we used it before, selfishness, but it's like failure. It's not a negative word.
No.
We all need to be selfish in our own ways, because if we're not, we never get anywhere.
Yeah. I always say you've got to have a plan for yourself. Otherwise you just fit in somebody else's plan, and you know what they've got planned for you? Nothing. Not because they're horrible, not because they hate you, just because they've got their life and they're making plans for their family and their children. You need to have your own plan. It hasn't got to be a systematic 20-step process that spans over the next 10 years. But, act with intention, act with purpose, have things that you're specifically going after just for you. And then there'll be the wider goals for your family and your partner. But you've got to have at least a vague idea of a plan that is just for you. And even if some doesn't fit somebody else's plan, you've still got to have the perseverance like Jess has had to push through it.
Well, actions, they always say, don't they, actions speak louder than words. And Like, we sit here and everybody does it. Everybody that's ever been a parent does it, tells the children to follow the dreams, do this, do that. And then the great majority, unfortunately, and it is unfortunately, don't do it. They accept the lot that they've been given and plug on through life. And maybe that's why we have a mental health crisis, who knows, in the country, because we've got a great deal of people who just accept their lot in life and give up on the dreams because, well, that's what society dictates, or that's what the family time dictates. But ultimately, if you're going to sit there and tell your children to go and follow the dreams, the only way you can show them that's okay is by doing it yourself. Otherwise,
absolutely right, brother.
They will not believe you, because they're going to see that you're lying to yourself because you're not doing it yourself. So therefore, you can't. It's okay for some people, but if it's not you and you want to go and get it, well, then do. And there will be some people may listen to this who may be worried about like how they can all fit in childcare and all that sort of stuff. You just cobble together, and
you're never ready, really. You've never got enough money to have kids. It's never the right time to leave the job. It's never going to be the right time.
You do one thing and you want more. That's just human nature. It just is.
So without thinking about regrets or anything like that, because it's not what this question is all about, but is there anything perhaps you wish you'd spent more time or less time doing? And again, it's more of a learning indicator perhaps for the people that may be still stuck in that place. Is there anything perhaps you thought you just should have done more of or done less of?
I don't actually have any regrets because I knew I wanted children from quite early on. I definitely didn't want children before I met Jamie, and then something quite quickly changed there, and I felt very, this maternal need. But I wanted to. Well, I think we've both felt the same. I wanted children young. I wanted to be able to do all the running around with them, and having a very active lifestyle with children and being young enough to still do that. And I think the want to join the fire service really hit when our daughter was born. She's nearly 8 now. There was that sudden urge that I've got a daughter in the world, and I want her to grow up knowing that she can do whatever she puts her mind to, despite what her gender dictates and what stereotypical roles women play in the world. So I don't regret at all the way I did it, because I wouldn't want to be in the fire service and having children while I'm in. I know that I'm most definitely done having children now, and I can concentrate on my career. And plus, I've had the life experience in my 20s that I've raised a family. I've matured a lot. I would rather be joined in my 30s than at 18, because I know so much more about life.
Yeah.
I've come from a different industry. I've had experience managing people, and I think ultimately that will make me a better firefighter. What
about yourself, Jamie?
Also none, really. The only personal regret I have is really a professional one, because, and this happens, believe it or believe it not, to quite a few cops, in that I hit about 4 or 5 years service and I sort of stagnated for 3 years, where I just found myself going through the motions and doing my job and doing it to the best of my ability, yes, but without any sort of goal. And now I'm on the sort of out of that, and I'm quite ready to push on into management, and that's really the next sort of challenge I'm setting myself, is to go for the first sort of stage of promotion. I now find myself quite a lot sitting there thinking, why did I just stagnate for 3 years? I could have been doing this 3 years ago. If I'm honest, I see colleagues that are younger than me, younger in service than me, that are now doing it, and I'm like, I could already be through that. So, but I don't have any regrets as to what way life has turned out as such. I just feel like I've
because we've been having children.
Not wasted 3 years by any stretch of the imagination, but it's 3 years where I've maybe not been the best version of me. Probably for one of a number of reasons, really. Family time was busy. I had the third child and everything that comes with having a newborn and things, who's now 3, funnily enough. I think I just have this sort of niggle in the back of my head that I've sort of not achieved as much as I would have liked to by this stage. And that's probably me just being hypercritical of myself, and only because you've asked that question.
No, mate, and I'm the same. And that's okay sometimes. Sometimes you're just waiting for that second wave, and it comes.
Yeah,
you just have to get everything else done.
It ultimately comes back to what I said about Jess, though. nobody's going to come to me and give me stripes and make me promoted. I have to get my own backside and do it. Ultimately, it's me who has to do the form and do the work and get the examples, prove myself as being capable and competent in that role. And maybe I wasn't mentally in the right place to do it 3 years ago, and now I am. Maybe that's why. But I just feel like for 3 years I could have been better.
I wonder if without me trying to fish for a storyline there, I wonder if there's any aspect of Jess's actions that has perhaps inspired you, because she obviously came out of that final pregnancy and decided to really go for it. And there's a lot to be said for the value of association when somebody really starts to push themselves again or is going for a big goal. It does subconsciously shine a light on yourself and go, what am I going for at the minute? What's making me tick? You know what I mean? That person's hungry. They're going for it. What does that mean for me right now?
No, you're 100% correct. That is exact. And I've said this to Jess not all that long ago, but it is ultimately that, as it's just seeing her, I suppose, go for her career goals, which has sort of reignited mine, if you will. That's not to say that the be all and end all is promotion, but
no, not at all.
There are many other things that you can do. But for me, I suppose it's the next logical step. I've done all the uniform roles I can do. I've done a specialism, and it's the next logical step. I've just sort of needed a metaphorical kick up the backside to sort of get on and do it, I suppose. Yeah, no, you're right. By Jess's actions, it has 100% sort of give it the much needed lift.
There you go, you see. Guys, I really absolutely love that conversation. We've been talking for over 2 hours straight now. I've just realised. I always say it surprises me when I always think, oh yeah, I'm never sure how these things will go. And I've just loved how open you've been and how, you showed such humility and self-awareness sharing that sort of stuff. Before we wrap it up, is there anything that you have a massive urge that you feel we haven't covered that you think people might have a benefit from hearing us share?
No, I think if I end my career knowing that I've inspired at least a handful of ladies to join the job, I will have fulfilled what I was aiming to achieve.
Absolutely. And I think it's incredible to see that most people would have said no to something like this so early on in their career, but you know that you've had to face so many challenges even just to get where you are today. So whilst you're very aware that you're still in the infancy of your career, it's never too soon to start paying it forward. It's never too soon to start helping somebody else out who is, even though if you only feel like you're on step 3 of your journey, some people are still on step 0.
That's exactly why I thought it would be a good idea to come on, and it might be nice to catch up in a few years to see what life has thrown.
I would love to. I would sincerely love to do that. When you're on your small holding, Jamie's ran around the world twice, and you're a watch commander at wherever you are. I'd love that. I know we spoke about getting that personal time, so I really appreciate you two taking 2 hours out of your evening to share this conversation with us all.
It's been great. Thank you. I appreciate you
Beautiful.
Inviting us on.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Send my love to the family, and I'll speak to you both soon.
Thanks a lot.
The Firefighters Podcast is a global podcast seeking to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operators. Through a series of wide-ranging conversations celebrating those within our sector, we seek to encourage and support this incredible group of people. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield, and I speak with individuals from all walks of life who I sincerely believe can add value to or develop those who have chosen this life path. Please support your emergency services wherever you are in the world, and thank you for listening.